So I was in the kitchen at our home in Ascot, listening to the radio, and I heard Bob Menzies' speech saying that Germany had invaded and war was... Great Britain had declared war on Germany and Australia was now at war. And I was sitting in the kitchen in our home in Ascot when I heard that. Before I went to Ascot, when I was very young, till the age of 5, we lived at West End. When I was 5, my father was retrenched during the Great Depression. Our family split up. He went up to work on a gold mining claim near Cooktown, and my mother went in a residential housekeeping job. And with my sister and brother, we went to live with my mother's parents at Kalinga. That's all detailed in the book. And until 1930, the end of 1936, and that's when we went to Ascot. That's when my father came back from Cooktown, and we rented a house in Benison Street, Ascot. That was in the end of 1936. I enlisted, actually before the war. When I was at school, I was on the shooting team, and I got an interest in rifle shooting, and I joined the cadets so I could go out on the rifle range. And that was before the war started. So at the beginning of the war, I was in the Army Cadets. And then, as I was an apprentice electrician, when manpower came in, they made my work a reserved occupation, and they dragged me out of the militia to keep on working a civilian electrician apprentice. And it was only in about 1940, early 42, I think, that the group of us got permission to overcome the manpower restrictions and join the Air Force. Initially, the group of us from where I was working at City Electric Light Company, we were all electrician apprentices, and we went down to the training school, Air Force training school in Melbourne, and we were camped at the exhibition buildings in Melbourne. And we used to attend classes at the Melbourne Tech College. And when we finished training there, I was posted to a flying training school at outside Bundaberg. I was working on the planes that they were using in the flying training school. From there, I was sent down to Sydney to join. They were just forming a new unit. When the Spitfires first came out here, they formed a mobile fighter sector. I don't know if you know what that is. You've seen Battle of Britain pictures where they had a big table moving things about. Well, that's a mobile fighter sector was a smaller model of those mobile. And they'd formed one of those to accompany the 3 Spitfire squadrons that went to Darwin. And I was doing maintenance electrical work on the batteries that charged the radios that accompanied the fighter sector that accompanied the Spitfires. Well, after a couple of weeks or so in Darwin itself, they set up the fighter sector at a place called Kamali Creek, which is about 100 miles south of Darwin, and that's where the Beaufighter Squadron 31 Squadron was stationed, and the fighter sector was alongside the 31 Squadron. And incidentally, my brother was a navigator in the 31 Squadron, so I used to see him fairly often. I didn't have a lot of association directly with the aircraft. I was mainly with just doing the work on the... it was very tedious work, just charging batteries for the radio stations. We used to do it 24 hours a day in shifts. Oh, we had six-man tents. Everything was under canvas. I think the mess building might have been a solid building, but the rest of all the living accommodation was under canvas, yeah. Mobile generators fitted in the back of trucks. I think it was 15 kVA alternators they were, and they used to provide all the power. The fighter sector was in touch with radio stations at several different locations where they had small radar sets, and they were in radio communication with the fighter sector. And we used to get their batteries too and charge them. Most of the scrambling was done with the Spitfire fighters, and they weren't at Kamali, they were in Darwin. And they did most of the defensive work. The bow fighters were mainly used on ground attack missions. They were more suited to that sort of work. They were very, very heavily armed with, I think, they had 6 machine guns and 4 20mm cannons, and they were very, very well suited to doing ground attack work, and that's what they did. They did a lot of work against shipping. There was nothing spectacular. We just get up, get dressed in shorts and boots. Sometimes we wore a shirt, but not always, but always a hat. In those early days, a lot of the fellas just wore shorts and boots and nothing else. Later on, when the army became more aware of protection against malarial mosquito, that's when they started wearing long shoes, long trousers and long sleeve shirts. But up to the time I was there, we weren't wearing them. It was while I was engaged on that we got a notice on the board that the Air Force was inviting invitations for transfer to training for aircrew, and I applied for that. The interviews were done at not far from where we camped, and there was about 10 of us were interviewed, and I think a couple of them were rejected, and I don't know what happened to the others, but there were 2, myself and a fellow named Alan Carman. He was from 31 Squadron, he knew my brother well, and we met at the airfield in Batchelor, waiting for the Douglas DC-3 to take us south for training. And that's where we first met, got to know each other, and we spent the rest of the war together, became good friends. Where we did our aircrew training was in South Australia. We initially went to Adelaide and then to Victor Harbour, which was on the outskirts of Adelaide. We did our initial training there, and at the end of the initial training, they broke up into different groups of pilots, navigators, gunners, and Alan and I both opted to go as navigators. We hoped to go on the bow fighters at the end of our training. We both succeeded in that and got sent to navigation training school. Initially to Bathurst, to Ballarat, but we'd only been there a short time when the nav school was transferred from Ballarat in Victoria to Mount Gambier in South Australia. And we did our nav training at Mount Gambier. The course was called Navigator Wireless, and the reason for that is we were trained in navigation and also in radio communication, because that was to prepare to go on a two-man aircraft where the one man did the radio communication and the nav. At the end of the course, Alan and I were both given commissions, and our first posting was initially, we did about 3 or 4 weeks on commando training using infantry weapons while we were waiting for a posting to be available. And they taught us how to use rifles and Tommy guns and hand grenades and everything that you wouldn't want when you're in a plane. We're posted to a unit called Section 22. Section 22 was under direct command of MacArthur's headquarters in Brisbane, and it was a secret unit, which is its primary purpose was to combat enemy radar. It was to locate the enemy radar stations was their big task. But they had a second task, was to combat enemy radar-controlled AK guns. I found most of our effort went into the second one against the AK guns, because when we were posted to American squadron attacking Japanese targets in Formosa and southeast China, and they had a lot of radar-controlled AK guns which were very accurate. There was a part of Section 22 was a unit called Field Unit Number 6, and it comprised 10 Aussies. There were 8 radar operators, a radio technician, and a clerical orderlies sergeant. And there were 4 squadrons in the 380th American Bomb Group, and each of the squadrons had 2 of their operators attached to it. And every time they went out on a mission, they'd be accompanied by the Australian operators and the sets. This technique was actually developed in Australia by the RAF, and then it was taken over by the Americans then. We were living with the Americans. Alan and I were living in a tent in the Americans' tent line, or in the midst, all of them. And when we were going on a mission, we'd always get ready before dawn, and they'd have somebody detailed to come and wake up all the crew who were flying that day. And they'd come around and wake us up, and we'd get our gear and go up to the mess and have breakfast, and then go to the briefing room and get last-minute briefing, get driven down to the airstrip, into the plane, and ready to go. With a big bag of clothes on them. Where the aircraft were sitting out on the tarmac in the sun, they'd get heated up like an oven, and when you got up there, it was cold. So we used to carry warm gear in a bag with us, put on as we got up. Flying day, it could be 12 or 13-hour trip, a round trip. I'd take sandwiches. They'd always taste like petrol. The radar gear, in some of the we used to fly, we didn't always fly with the same crew or with the same aircraft. Americans had their planes in a pool, and they were allocated to individual crews as they went each trip. And this applied to the radar gear, which happened to be in whatever plane then. So we'd be going on this trip probably with a crew we hadn't met before. And in some of the planes, the radar gear was situated above the bomb bay, and some of them it was in the nose of the plane. I didn't like the ones above the bomb bay much, because when they opened the bomb doors, it was like sitting in a wind tunnel. We used to prefer operating from the ones where the all the gear was in the nose of the plane. You could see what was going on there too. Most of the trips I did with a group formation of 4 squadrons, so that's 32 libs going, and those the 4 squadrons had been grouped together, but not all bunched together in the one. There were like 4 separate groups. We never flew directly to the target. Generally fly near the target, but wouldn't fly directly at it until the last possible moment. And the reason for that was that the Japs had anti-aircraft guns that they could move quickly, and we didn't want them to know where to move it to until the last minute. And before going in to do the raid, they changed the course, the airspeed, and the height, and that's when we'd switch on the jamming gear. I didn't explain about the jamming gear yet. There's a little transmitter. A radar consists of a signal which is transmitted and then bounced off the target and back to the transmitter. And we were being the target. We received this signal, and we had gear. We could recognise what sort of a transmission we were receiving, and we could tell if it was one of these high frequency radar signals. We could tell if we were receiving that, and if so, we'd tune in a little transmitter to that frequency, but not turn it on. And then before we did the actual bomb raid, we'd change course, speed and height, and then we'd turn on the transmitter at the last minute. And the reason for that was that we didn't know whether they had a second set up on a different frequency ready to switch on. We didn't know whether they had that. And we found that it must have been pretty effective because they never shot us down. But one day my friend Alan was supposed to go on a trip and they didn't wake him up, so he didn't go. And when the squadron came back, where Alan would have been sitting, there was a big hole in his seat. And we congratulated him on his good luck for having survived, and he said, well, if I'd have been flying with my gear on, they mightn't have shot us. They mightn't have been able to get us. Yeah. So we didn't know. Non-commissioned ranks and the commissioned ranks live separately, and I was the only commissioned Australian in the 528. So I got permission to live with Alan and Johnny Carroll in the 529th Lions. So the 3 of us shared a tent in the 529th line. I had to get special permission for that so that the 528th bloke who wake up the crew in the morning knew where to find me. One memorable mission I had, we were due to go very early in the morning and went to bed early at night, and I woke up and the lights were on in the mess. I thought, good, they've forgotten to wake us up. So I raced over and I woke up Johnny and Alan. Come on, we went up to the mess and it was still the previous night. Had to go back to bed again. They didn't thank me for waking them up. I never met one American who liked tea, and he was a fellow named Bill Bennett. He'd married an Australian girl, and he probably acquired a taste for it after that. Our tent in amongst the American Lions was fairly popular. We came by some tin goodies from the group mess. We never did find out how we came to get them, but we had tin peaches and that sort of stuff. And some of the ranks who knew we had them, they used to come down and join us. We used to spend the time doing physical things, going for a run, playing sport, the RAF had some sort of a hut down at the beach, and they had a roster for some of the officers to go down and stay there, do a bit of fishing, take it in turns. My turn never arrived. We had a party in the mess one night, invited some of the officers from surrounding units, and Alan and I, we got hold of a little boat made out of masonite, and we took it up Rapid Creek, made some homemade crab nets, and caught some lovely big mud crabs, man, for the party. We used to listen to the news in the mess at night. We just heard that the bomb had been dropped, and what a terrifically big thing it was, and what an effect it was. And when we heard the war was finished, we went sort of delirious. Everybody drank as much as they could get hold of, you know. And then we waited to be sent home, and nothing happened. We stayed there. I think it was a month or so before we got home. We were just told it was an atomic bomb, you know, and just accepted that it was something bigger than anybody could imagine, you know.